Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome. This is the third in the series of many webinars for this summer on sustainability in our academic operations on campus. Today, I'm really excited that we get to learn more about the new Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Stewardship, which launched less than a year ago. So it's brand new and lots of progress and opportunities that the center provides. So I'm excited that we get to all learn about that. Our presenters today are Kel Weeder and Sam Chapman, both from biology, who are you're both chairing this center, correct? Yeah, wonderful. So they're going to take it away, and I'm gonna mute myself.
Thanks, Liesl. So Kel's actually going to start off, and then we'll kind of switch back and forth. That works for everybody.
Yeah, we've practiced this for hours and hours, right? So thank you, Liesl, for inviting us to do this. It's always a pleasure to participate in things like this. We're going to talk mostly about our new Center for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Stewardship. So this slide has some bulleted points that represent our mission. But and I'm not going to read them to you, but just to kind of summarize, we felt we had a lot of talented people here at the university that kind of do ecological, environmental, stewardship kinds of things. And we really weren't getting the word out as well as we could about all the cool things that I think our faculty do. So I guess that was one of the main reasons for starting this center, is to do a better job of sharing what we do to not only the Villanova community, but to the greater community at large. So that's our mission. Can you advance me, Sam?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry there. Okay, so I think we missed a slide. Sorry, Kel. Missed a lot. There we go.
Wow. So these are center members. There are 6 faculty and 2 technicians, and I'm not going to go through all their names, but all of these people are very active in research, focusing on biodiversity. In particular, Dr. Bauer in the upper left and Dr. Jackman on the top right. They're gecko and salamander experts. You see Sam Chapman, and to the right of Sam Chapman is her husband, Adam Langley, who does work in marshes, among other things. Bottom left is Nat Weston in GEV, who also studies coastal marshes, freshwater marshes. And that guy with the beard is Bay. So, and those are 2 technicians that are affiliated with our center. Next. So this kind of puts, we stole this from the 2018 global change document that you see listed at the bottom. And so this kind of shows where we fit in. So we have various stressors, and climate change is a big one, but increasing CO2 is sort of related to climate change, but can have different effects. And there are non-climate stressors that typically have to do with us. So what are the kinds of things that we do in terms of developing the world that can have effects on biodiversity at the left? And so this is kind of the first step in understanding how these stressors affect the environment, is to understand the flora and the fauna and the relative abundance of species that live in a particular place at a particular time, and how they might be changing. So that's biodiversity. And we know that as ecologists, as biodiversity changes, there can be implications for the structure of ecosystems, both terrestrial and aquatic, meaning what's the relative abundance of the different species that live in that place at a particular time. And once you change the structure of an ecosystem, it can affect the function of that ecosystem. So we often talk about ecosystem services. And for example, Dr. Chapman's going to talk about the ecosystem services that mangrove wetlands give to communities. And then there are lots of others as well. Sequestering carbon is another ecosystem service. And as those ecosystem services start to change, there may be implications for human well-being on not just the local scale, but on regional and global scales as well. And so that's kind of the things that we think about as faculty and researchers in our center. Next. So just a little bit of history for this term sustainability. So if you get 10 people in a room and you ask each of them what to define sustainability, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. And so I think it's always useful to have a little bit of a historical context. And so I think sustainability really can be traced back to the 1700s when the Germans, of course, the Germans are very, very organized in what they do, used this term called Nachhaltigkeit, yeah, something like that, when they were developing manuals for conducting essentially sustainable forestry in Germany. So a very planned approach to harvesting trees from forests. And that German term essentially means don't harvest more than the forest can regenerate. So if you over-harvest, then the forest won't regenerate in time and you won't be able to sustainably harvest that forest. So that's kind of the first concept of sustainability. And then in the 1900s, early 1900s, when ecology was really emerging as a discipline of its own, the issue of sustainability took on an ecological definition, which essentially is the ability of an ecosystem to maintain its essential functions and to maintain its biodiversity over long periods of time. So for a long time, sustainability was really an ecological concept, but that changed in the 1980s when the UN commissioned the Brundtland Commission to come up with a plan and a document that more clearly defines sustainable development. And so now we see the word development being added to the concept of sustainability, which really casts it in a whole new light, more leaning toward the human implications of sustainability than the ecological ones. There are some ecologists who actually didn't like this because it focuses too much on the needs of humans and not enough on the nature of natural ecosystems. But that's a definition that came out in the 1980s, 1987. And it was kind of expanded in the 2005 World Summit on Sustainability. I'm not going to read that to you, but you'll often see that little Venn diagram at the right. And so this new vision of sustainability says that there are social aspects to it, there are economic aspects to it, and there are ecological aspects to it. And when you merge all of those together, you get that little triangle-like thing in the middle, which means sustainable. And so that came out of the 2005 World Summit. Today, Villanova has a sustainability initiative, as you know, but we actually don't have a definition of sustainability anywhere on our website. So, but I think it's safe to say that the Villanova approach to sustainability incorporates that Venn diagram to the right. So that's just a little bit of a history. Sam? Okay, click again. Okay, so our emphasis really goes from right to left. We start with trying to understand biodiversity. And so we're ecologists, we focus mostly on natural systems that we study. And although we'll touch upon human well-being, it's not the major focus of our center. So we're going to give you a couple of examples of that in just a minute.
Okay, so we wanted to sort of let you know how our research programs work. This is a research center, but we also have educational components as well. And we thought we would just tell you a little bit about what it looks like for really all the faculty members that are part, and the technicians and graduate students that are part of our center, what kind of like our work really looks like in terms of the research angle. And so our research programs for really almost all of the faculty are fairly large, and they involve people at Villanova, including the faculty, of course, and technicians and postdocs, as well as really the people that are doing a lot of the work, which are graduate students, undergraduates that are working in our lab. And we really are partnering with lots of other people throughout the Villanova community, as well as kind of the communities of people that are incorporated with the sites that we work at, which really span, you know, a large range of places. You know, Erin Bauer does a lot of work in Africa and Madagascar. Kel works in Canada, Nat Weston works more locally. Up in the Northeast, I work in Florida, Adam works in Maryland. You know, we work kind of all over the place. And so what's a key sort of part of our research teams are the people that are managing and doing a lot of the environmental education at the sites where we're actually doing our research. And so these are just some pictures of some of my graduate students in the field, the technician that we employ down in Florida, collaborators from the Smithsonian, and this organization. This is a National Estuarine Research Reserve where I do a lot of my research. These National Estuarine Research Reserves are all over the country. They're set up to be research reserves. NOAA funds them along with the state governments. but they also have a big educational component as well, which has been really great for us because, you know, part of the missions of our grants is not just to do the science, but also to do outreach and education on the science that we're doing. And so we partner a lot with the environmental educators at this research reserve in Florida. We also have teams of other principal investigators from universities, other universities throughout the country and really throughout the world. And so I just wanted to sort of give you a picture of what this looks like, you know, in the field, in the greenhouse at Villanova, which we use a lot for a lot of our experiments, as well as, you know, hanging out on the beach sometimes when we're done with our field work. So we wanted to give you also a couple examples of the programming that we did during this first, I guess, 9 months that we've been in existence. So we had an official launch in October, which was really awesome. And we were privileged to have Jonathan Losos come and give a public talk. Maybe some of you were there to help launch us. And Dr. Losos is an amazing scientist. He actually just had a huge amount of media coverage about some work that he did that he actually talked about in his public talk at Villanova about geckos, how their toe pads actually work during hurricanes when they're sort of hanging on to vegetation during big storms, and how that sort of affects the selection on these geckos. And he's, you know, done tons of cool science on sort of rapid evolution, how environmental stressors and global change can influence biodiversity and evolution of various types of organisms. And he partners with Dr. Jackman and Dr. Bauer in our center. So we've had 3 public talks on science. So we had Dr. Losos come talk, but we also had another scientist come talk about amphibian declines, Daniel here, shown here. And that was a really amazing talk about how we're losing lots of amphibians all over the world and what some of the drivers of that are. We had Julie Walker. Dr. Walker comes from University of Nevada, and she came and gave a public talk, but she also did a bioinformatics workshop, which and this happened like right before we shut down, which was really nice of her to come. But so we had this workshop that was not just, you know, faculty that wanted to learn more about bioinformatics, but some graduate students. We actually had some scientists that came from Temple University and the Academy of Natural Sciences, Drexel, to come all to this workshop and talk about bioinformatics and learn more about how to use it. And so that was, these types of workshops are something that we increasingly see ourselves doing over the next couple of years, because I think they can serve the larger community in terms of skills that we can, you know, combine and that we can use across engineering and sustainable engineering and civil and environmental engineering, biology, geography and the environment, chemistry. Lots of different departments need these skills, like bioinformatics, like science communication, like you know, all kinds of different things that they're all sort of doing the same, but in different aspects of our work. One of the important things that we wanted to do during the first year was start to really bring in a group of graduate students that are affiliated with the center. And so we started that really within our own departments of biology and geography and environment, but we also had some graduate students come to this graduate student roundtable that we had from engineering as well. And so we sort of talked to them about what kind of things our center can do from them. And we are following that up actually next week, and then again in July with these graduate students science, CBEST Science Summer Slam, I think is our little thing we're calling it. Just for graduate students to sort of talk to us about how they're doing their research during COVID times. And then we're going to continue and follow up on some of the graduate student initiatives that they had presented that they would like us to work with them on, being graduate students affiliated with biodiversity and ecosystem stewardship type research at the university. And so that's something that's ongoing. We've done a lot of media engagement, and it's been great to meet with some of the media relations people at the universities in terms of our center. You know, we've had, Kel and I both done some interviews with NPR and KYW. Our PBS NewsHour followed up on an earlier segment that they did on one of our research sites in Florida with like a kind of end of the year thing in December, which was exciting. And so we got to see one of the reporters, the actual clip of where he fell into the mud, which they didn't show in the original special, but they brought it out for this end of year thing, which I was really impressed they did that. So that was pretty good. And so we kind of what we want to talk a little bit about sort of what we can do for you as the Villanova community. And so Kel, maybe you give an overview here and then we can kind of switch back and forth to give us some examples of how we do kind of outreach and environmental education type things and how our science kind of matters in the broader world, because hopefully that'll give you some ideas about how we can be helpful to you.
Yeah, so I'm not going to read this to you, but in general, we're here to do service to the Villanova community in any way that we can. And I think all of our members are interested in doing this. So if you have a class, if you're teaching a class and you're kind of struggling to find a way to integrate sustainability into your class, give us a call or pop us an email. It turns out that all of our research is not just science. It's almost every bit of research we do has social, economic, political, ethical issues related to it. And we don't often talk about that as much as we should, but I think our center has a team of people that could bring some interesting things to whatever class you teach. So feel free to contact us, either Sam or me, and we'll have a little conversation, and we're more than happy to help you out with your teaching or with research that you're doing or your students are doing as well. So we're here for you.
So just to give you some examples, so one of the things that our group has been getting increasingly engaged in is this natural capital valuation. I'm sure Liesl knows a lot about this, but it's been around for a couple decades now, but it sort of ebbs and flows in its popularity, I think. But I kind of continue to stick with this natural capital idea, and it seems to be coming back around again as a really great way to sort of value the ways that natural ecosystems do things for us as humans. And so there's different ways in which we can use natural capital valuation. And there's all kinds of models and products and tools that have been developed by people like at Stanford and World Wildlife Fund, some of which we use. But these approaches essentially allow us to say, let's say, for example, I'll give you an example that we did in our research program. And I want to highlight that this work was not done by me. I had the funding to do it, but really Cheryl Dowdy, who's a graduate student in biology and actually just went and finished her PhD really fast and is now doing a NASA postdoctoral fellowship, doing more of this kind of work, which is exciting with mangroves. But so she and Caitlin Dittmeyer, who's actually an English major and now is actually getting her master's at Villanova, which is exciting too, really partnered in terms of doing the science piece of this. And then Caitlin took our general biology class and was really interested in kind of science journalism. And so she wanted to learn how to present some of the results of our publications in more of a public friendly way. So for example, she developed with Cheryl this infographic in which they produced this to sort of show how these ecosystems, and in this case, we're talking about ecosystems at the Kennedy Space Center, they're coastal, strips along these ecosystems at the Kennedy Space Center, which protect NASA's really expensive facilities from big storms. And we know that Florida has increasingly had lots of hurricanes, which is really detrimental to houses, all kinds of public infrastructure. And so we were able to figure out that, for example, this coastal vegetation provided 800% more coastal protection than in terms of mangroves than salt marshes did. And it would provide $5 million US of coastal protection more than man-made barriers would. And that kind of information, particularly the financial information, is often used by land managers, public officials. We're increasingly doing this in North Florida with the city of St. Augustine, like sort of putting a number on what this coastal vegetation can actually do for them in terms of protecting their structures and therefore not having to build seawalls. And at the same time, we get the benefits of those ecosystems in terms of the biodiversity, the habitats that they provide, et cetera. And so it's kind of a win-win for everyone, I think. And so really Caitlin and Cheryl took the lead on this and doing this natural capital valuation at Kennedy Space Center. Go ahead, Kel.
So I study peat bogs. I'm an ecosystem ecologist and a biogeochemist, and we work in northern Alberta, Canada. And recently, our work has been focusing on the effects of oil sands development on surrounding ecosystems. So let's tell you a little bit about oil sands. Oil sands is sand that has thick oil in it, and as you probably know, it's mined in northern Alberta and processed into oil. It's a huge environmental disaster. But one of the things that happens is both from the stacks at the plants, and you see one on the left, and from the huge diesel trucks that are operating 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, are releasing nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides and ammonia into the atmosphere, where it comes back down on the region's ecosystems as in rain and in gaseous exposure. And so we have shown that this has implications for the structure and function of peat bogs. And I won't go into that in great detail. I could for like an hour and a half, but I'm not going to do that. And so we measure these environmental effects on natural ecosystems, and this has implications for biomonitoring of the pollution and for ecosystem function. So I think I might have one more slide, Sam. Yeah, so just to point out that there are broad implications of this particular work. The yellow part on the left is the extent of the oil sands deposits in northern Alberta. And all those red dots are First Nations communities. And so this development of the oil sands resource has tremendous effects on First Nations communities. And these are communities often that haven't really seen white men for a long period of time. So they've been pretty isolated from white people until the development of the oil sands. And so there's a huge tension between development of the resource and the First Nations communities. Just recently, in the light of the COVID pandemic, the government of Alberta decided to suspend all environmental monitoring associated with oil sands. And you can imagine that, and they just did that. They just said, okay, we're not going to do any monitoring. Well, the First Nations communities were really not happy with that. And there are a couple of headlines from, I think, last week, where the pressure from First Nations communities was sufficient that environmental monitoring has now been restored. So we do not only the ecological research, but there are implications with governments and regulation and First Nations people, sociological implications that every now and then we get involved with. So it kind of makes the work pretty fascinating. Sam, you're muted.
Sam, you're on mute.
Sorry. Has to happen on every Zoom call, at least once, had to be me, right? So I just wanted to highlight too that it's not just Kel and I doing research that has these societal impacts, and we sort of always are interacting with these stakeholders, but Doctors Bauer and Jackman as well are doing this biodiversity research all over the world. And in particular, they're working in areas that have a lot of biodiversity, but are being used for things like mining. And so the Bauer Lab in particular is active in the description of new species and threats in New Caledonia, Central and Southern Africa, and Peninsular India. And so this is just showing some of the examples of the species descriptions that they've done and the biodiversity descriptions that they've done in various places that have led to really how these mines can go forward with new developments in new areas. And so it's really fascinating work that they're doing. And one of their graduate students who just finished, Susanna Bandera, maybe some of you know, is actually now sort of transitioned back to working with her government in Africa to actually make the conservation plan for the government to actually decide where to put these mines and not to put these mines. And so it's, I mean, our graduate students and students are doing a lot of this work, and it's really fascinating and important for understanding how biodiversity can persist, particularly in parts of the developing world. So I just wanted to give you kind of finish off with some last things that are coming up with CBEST. As we all know, in various parts of the university, it's a challenging time to have events, and so we're obviously not going to be having any in-person events anytime soon. But we are going to be having this Summer Science Slam that is particularly focused on graduate student research, but other people are more than welcome to come. And if you're interested, you can message me or whatever, and I can send you the Zoom link. And that's going to be on June 30th and July 30th from 11 to noon. We have, of course, a mailing list that announces our events, and we are planning on having a couple of these other public talks done virtually over the fall semester. One hopefully by someone that works in the Arctic. You know, we're sort of going from tropics to Arctic back and forth, two really fascinating types of ecosystems. We have a Twitter at CBEST Nova, so you can follow us there, and we announce everything that we're doing on there. And we're just like everyone else are revamping our website. We obviously have a new statement on anti-racism in our current website, and our new website is going to launch pretty soon. Another thing that we're working on, I see Anita's on here, which is great, is we've been partnering with Sustainable Engineering and some of their graduate students who are doing these awesome biodiversity assessments on campus. And so we've been talking with them, talking with Stoneleigh across the street about sort of the biodiversity issues on campus, and are really interested in taking part in those discussions as they move forward with the sustainability plan for the next, the future. We're also developing an alumni network. This is something that was actually requested by some of our students to kind of bring together all of the students and faculty who have worked as a part or affiliated with CBEST as kind of a professional networking thing, right? That can be really helpful for graduate students as they're looking for postdocs and jobs, et cetera, to have this network. And so stay tuned for our virtual public talks in the fall semester. And we're hoping to do a science communication workshop as well sometime in the near future. And so, Kel, is there anything else you wanted to say? I think
that says it all right there. We're happy to take questions.
Yeah.
Or take suggestions of things that you think we should be doing to help you.
Yeah, no, this is really great. I definitely learned a lot about what the research that you're doing, and I definitely will echo, as you can imagine, the work that has been done to try to monetize the impact or the benefit of ecosystems. I think that is a helpful tool in communicating behavior change in particular, and awareness of the importance of these ecosystems. So that's really great to see.
This is Chuck Coe. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Chuck.
I have a question and a comment. As we move towards all the issues associated with climate change and global warming, there are projections of 20% of our species disappearing with increasing rapidity, unprecedented in past times. What impact does that have on basically survivability of humans, our food supply chain, and all the associated issues? Because this is extremely important, I think. So a couple of comments around that would be really helpful.
Yeah, Chuck, I'll just comment. As you, I am sure, know, in particular, some of these ecosystem services like pollination, which are incredibly important for us, not just pollinating crops that we grow, but pollinating the plants that are essentially regulating our climate, right, on Earth, is incredibly important, right? And if we lose there's been lots of articles about the insect apocalypse, the declines in bird species, right, which one of our faculty, Bob Curry, works on, right? It's incredibly worrisome for the future of our planet. A lot of these marine coastal ecosystems that I work in have a lot of, photosynthesizing organisms that also are doing a lot of the carbon sequestration that are important for food webs in those oceans, including fish that we eat, as well as actually, again, regulating the climate. So I think there's a little bit of, at least in some of the ecosystems I've been working in, and like mangroves in particular, there's a lot of hope. There's been actually less deforestation of mangroves in the last decade, a lot less, like by an order of magnitude than there was the 10 years previously. And so in terms of losing, actual ecosystems, I think that in some cases, it's better in some places. Now we know the Amazon right now under Bolsonaro is a disaster in terms of losing it. But Kel, did you want to say anything?
Well, it's there's some, I guess, not terrible news that because climate change we think it's fast, but if you're a bird, it might not be that fast. Many species have the ability to move. And so we're going to see species distributions move along with the changing climate. And some species have a better ability to do that than others. But when that happens, we get species interacting with species that they haven't interacted with before. And it's hard to predict what the outcome of that's going to be. I'll also just add that one of the things that we talk about a lot in general biology is one of the consequences of changing climate and the changing of the ranges of some insects is some of these are carriers of major human diseases. And so there are lots of tropical diseases that are pretty severe that we don't currently see in the United States, but have already started moving into the southern states associated with climate change. And so these are called neglected tropical diseases often by the CDC and the UN. And that's going to be a consequence of climate change that we're going to have to be dealing with and already are dealing with in the southern US.
Thank you. And I didn't know this. I didn't know this center existed. So this is extremely informational. Liesl, thank you for bringing us to our attention.
Yeah,
Lots
no,
of
I didn't realize
opportunities.
it existed until I came back from maternity leave. So I was also very pleasantly surprised when I got the email from Cal about this. So it's great. I'm glad we're able to share the work, the amazing work that you guys are doing.
Yeah,
There was a
Cal,
quick question. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say there was a quick question about the sharing of the slide regarding the history of sustainability. Would you mind if we share that with registered attendees?
Sounds good. No problem.
Yeah, you can share everything if you want.
Okay. Yeah.
So in my alternative energy class, Cal, we actually do a calculation on how much heat and energy is just associated with extracting that oil from the aqueous media that's needed to bring it out of the ground, and how much water is boiled off in order to actually get the product. And putting this eco-environmental initiative as part of our discussion would aid in the students' understanding and broadening the message that they're getting around how all these things are interconnected.
Yep.
And because we certainly talk about fossil fuels generating NOx and SOx, and here's another driver that we can use to teach the students that we can't continue to burn fossil fuels, much less get them from tar sands.
Yeah, I can't resist making a comment that a lot of times people in the US think, well, this is a Canadian problem, it's not our problem, but we import more oil from Canada than we do from the entire Persian Gulf. And that's been true for a decade. So almost all the oil that comes from the oil sand, almost all of it comes to the US. So it's not a Canadian problem, it's a problem that we have. And I just mentioned one other thing that's kind of interesting, that sometimes we don't realize what some of the environmental impacts of development are. And we've now heard from First Nations people who hunt moose. So one of their main sources of meat is moose. And they say there are no moose anymore because of the development of oil sands and the noise that it makes scare the moose away. So now they have to go farther and farther and farther away from their communities to hunt moose. And this is really disturbing to them. So, you know, there are often consequences that we don't think about.
Chuck, can I ask you a question while we're chatting?
Absolutely.
So are you I've really been trying to follow this, you know, alternative energy uptick during this COVID time because of the energy expensive way that coal-fired power plants have to operate. And I've seen some of these numbers, right, which is that for the first time, right, solar and wind are outstripping coal in certain places in the US because of this time, right, because of COVID. So are you encouraged by this? Like, are you encouraged by what's happening now with alternatives kind of coming more online because of the problems with coal and operating those plants with lots of people?
Yeah, I'm encouraged, but there's still this huge lever of the US government, which is still subsidizing offshore oil drilling and other fossil fuel operations at an extreme extent. Right now in this pandemic period, we really have an opportunity to change regulations and increase the desire to use renewable energies and distributed energy systems to make a bigger difference in the amount of fossil fuel that we have to use in our processes and in our plans for, you know, building backup systems for uninterrupted power for data centers that are going up. It's really encouraging to hear that 380 megawatts of solar PV are being used to essentially power the new data station that Google's building in South Carolina. And we need to see more of that. But to really move the needle and get away from fossil fuels, there has to be government changes to de-emphasize and defund, if you will, big oil.
especially because there's also reports that renewables are better or more profitable as an investment now, right, than fossil fuels, which is just fascinating, right? That at least market-wise, I saw some report about that.
Yes, there are, but just remember that the cost of gasoline right now is one of the biggest barriers to EV vehicles, because there isn't enough renewable electrons produced on the grid. And, you know, the efficiency with which we're getting that electricity and the cost we're paying for it in the New York area versus the price of running a diesel engine right now is in the wrong direction.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, we definitely blew past the half-hour mark. I'm gonna stop the recording. But if our presenters are happy to stay on, we can stay on and continue to ask questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.